Monique destroys Hollywood's silence pack names, flashes of camera lights outside, hushed tones weaving tension in the hallways, and a jury clutching their pens like weapons. But no one, not even the seasoned court reporters who had seen careers disintegrate in a single testimony, expected her. Not Monique. She wasn't supposed to be on any list. No press leaks, no heads up. Just a quiet, almost ghostly entrance through the side door of the federal courtroom on day 6 of the Diddy trial. The moment her silhouette appeared, the atmosphere fractured. Diddy, in his tailored charcoal suit, leaned forward slowly, lips parting just enough to whisper something sharp to his lawyer. The courtroom artist's pencil hesitated mid-stroke. Across the gallery, someone gasped audibly. The tension didn't build, it detonated. Monique took the stand like someone who'd waited a decade for this one moment. Her voice, firm but without venom, struck like flint in a gasoline chamber. "I was asked to speak the truth," she said. "So let's do that." And with that, everything changed. For years, she had been the cautionary tale in industry gossip circles, the once glorious Oscar winner who dared to defy the Hollywood machine. They called her difficult, erratic, bitter. But now, under oath, backed by transcripts, recordings, and a spine fortified by silence endured, she rewrote the narrative in real time. The prosecution hadn't planned for her, but they didn't object either. The judge glanced down at a sheet of paper with her name scrawled in last-minute ink. The defense shifted in their seats like chairs had turned into hot plates. A new story was being told, one that stretched back 2 decades and coiled its way around some of the most powerful names in entertainment: Tyler Perry, Oprah Winfrey, and, of course, Sean "Diddy" Combs. She read from a timeline. It wasn't just a list of events. It was a demolition blueprint. Dates, calls, locations. A haunting trail of meetings that began with smiles and ended in whispered threats, rescinded offers, and then silence. The kind of silence you don't just endure, the kind you're forced into. "He told me," she said, referencing Perry, "that if he apologized publicly, it would blow back on people not ready to be exposed." "Who was he protecting?" the prosecutor asked. Her eyes never flinched. Puff. Shock didn't ripple. It cracked the air open. The court listened as Monique described a 2018 call with Tyler Perry, one that she had recorded. He had admitted she was right, that her blackballing was unjust. He promised to apologize. He never did. Why? Because, as he allegedly said, the apology could collapse the shield that kept people like Diddy untouchable. She read the transcript word for word. Even the judge, trying to stay composed, leaned slightly forward. In a case about power and silence, Monique wasn't just another voice. She was a rupture. And then came the bombshell. "I went to one of his parties once," she said. A different kind of quiet fell. Not the hush of surprise, the hush of collective dread. She detailed the party, 2006, a sprawling estate in the hills, candlelit halls, phones confiscated at the door, NDA slips handed out like drink tickets. She described the ambient R&B music. The assistant who told her, "It's all about the experience here. You're safe if you sign." She didn't sign. She left. And her career, the buzz, the invitations, the respect left with her. "I didn't play along," she said, "and I got cut out." Her words echoed what others had only whispered, that Diddy's parties weren't networking events. They were rituals, controlled, monitored, and protected by a network of enablers in tailored suits and expensive faith. And that was the true danger. Not the man himself, but the machine built to protect him. Monique tied the system together with receipts, literal ones, emails, timelines, even a forwarded chain from a PR firm that included her name, Diddy's, and Perry's subject line, "Narrative Containment." The courtroom stirred. They weren't just cleaning up messes, she said. They were writing scripts, casting roles, and I was written out. She spoke of the now famous moment when Tyler Perry walked into Bishop T.D. Jakes' church and handed over $1 million check. "They called it a blessing," I saw a transaction. The gallery couldn't hold its composure. Even Diddy's lawyer raised a brow. Weeks later, Diddy and Perry were photographed, arms slung like fraternity brothers at the BET Awards. Coincidence. People think these alliances are built on mutual respect. But sometimes, it's just mutually assured destruction, she said. And then she turned toward the jury, her tone shifting from declarative to something raw, almost maternal. I know what fear smells like, and I know what silence costs. The defense tried to interrupt. The judge waved them off. This testimony, he said, has legal and contextual value. Let her finish. When Monique pulled out the transcript of Perry's recorded apology, the gallery tilted forward as if gravity had changed. She handed it to the bailiff. The judge read, then nodded. It was in, everything was in, and Monique, the woman once shunned as bitter, difficult, delusional, had just set the trial on fire. The courtroom still buzzed with the electricity of Monique's final words. Her transcript was in, her voice had carried, and now, for the first time in 6 days, the jurors weren't just watching Diddy. They were watching the structure that built him, and the man himself silent. He didn't shift, didn't blink, but his hands, those always composed, mogul-caliber hands, trembled on the edge of the defense table. His attorney leaned in, whispering too fast to control his own lips. Across the aisle, the prosecution looked almost stunned by the gift they'd just been handed, but Monique wasn't done. No. What she had delivered wasn't closure. It was ignition. She had cracked the seal on something older than the allegations, deeper than one man's sins, a covenant of silence, wrapped in influence and sold as success. I wasn't just pushed out, she said calmly as court resumed. I was repositioned by people who decided that my silence was worth more than my talent. Then she reached into her bag again. Another folder. More paper. This one, she explained, contained a string of communications between PR agencies hired by both Revolt TV and Tyler Perry Studios. Emails that didn't just discuss damage control. They outlined the architecture of narrative suppression, how to isolate her from future projects, how to manage perception, how to feed the term difficult to casting directors like bait. And most damning of all, they included references to Cassie Ventura. The room froze. Now, Monique wasn't just supporting Cassie's earlier claims, she was showing that they were part of the same strategy. 2 women, 2 voices, 1 erasure plan. She turned toward the gallery, scanning the faces of the press. They told you I was hard to work with, but they never told you why they stopped calling. It wasn't because I said too much. It was because I saw too much and refused to lie. The judge took a long moment reviewing the new exhibits. The defense, scrambling, raised procedural objections, but it was too late. The evidence was entered. Monique had now directly connected Tyler Perry and Diddy through business dealings, damage control efforts, and a coordinated effort to silence women who spoke out. What had been seen as a trial about a single man's behavior had metastasized into an indictment of the culture that protected him. And then she named the third pillar, Oprah. The room didn't gasp this time. They exhaled, because they knew it was coming. Monique wasn't hurling accusations. She was laying bricks. Foundation, context. She described how Oprah had once promised never to exploit her story, then invited her brother, the man who abused her, onto national television, after Monique refused to do a press tour. That wasn't a mistake, she said, voice steady. That was a message from the top of the pyramid, one that said play along or be played. After that, everything changed, she said. And don't tell me it wasn't coordinated. I received an email thread accidentally forwarded from a crisis PR team. Subject line, managing the Monique problem. The judge asked to see the email. She handed over a redacted printout. One line was clear. Link her narrative to past conflicts. Position as emotional instability. And beside it, 3 names. Puff. Tyler. Oprah. At this point, the courtroom's energy wasn't tension anymore. It was revolution. For so long, the conversation had centered on whether Diddy's alleged actions could be proven. But now, Monique had shown that the far greater crime might be how many powerful people had made sure the truth never saw daylight. She didn't have to cry. She didn't have to yell. Her calm was more destructive than outrage. I didn't disappear because I was angry. She said, I disappeared because I wouldn't be silent. She paused. Then she looked directly at the judge. And now, I won't be quiet for you either. So let's talk about the list. Silence doesn't always fall gently. Sometimes it crashes. When Monique uttered those 6 words. So let's talk about the list. The courtroom didn't shift. It froze, as if every breath was drawn in, but none dared be exhaled. Even the judge, who had thus far kept an iron grip on procedural decorum, leaned forward a half-inch, not because she'd said something out of order, but because she was about to say something no one in that room could pretend they hadn't heard. There's a list in Hollywood, she began, voice slow, deliberate, not written, not official, but everyone knows it exists. She didn't reach for notes this time. No timeline, no folder, just memory, the kind you don't need paper for because it's been carved into the skin. It's the list of people you don't speak against. The untouchables. The ones who, if you even whisper their names in criticism, your phone stops ringing, your projects vanish, your team goes ghost, and when you ask why, no one answers because they're protecting their own spot on the ladder. She paused, then dropped the hammer. Puff was on that list. Tyler was on that list. And Oprah, she practically created it. The defense team sprang up. Your Honor. Overruled, the judge said, not even glancing their way. Let her finish. The words rolled like thunder through the room, because this wasn't just testimony anymore. It was cultural scripture. Monique explained the list's function. It didn't blacklist the innocent. It protected the powerful. If you asked too many questions, if you turned down the wrong offer, if you refused to play the game, you weren't just excluded, you were erased. Don't you think it's strange? She asked the jury. How many people worked with Diddy, Tyler, Oprah, and then disappeared? She listed actors, names the public loved for a moment, then lost track of. People who never had scandals, never caused trouble, just vanished. Some of them said no. She said, some of them saw things. Her voice dipped lower, like pulling the audience into a whisper meant only for them. And some of them were never supposed to be in the room in the first place. Then she dropped something no one expected. Not even the prosecution. A redacted statement from a former actor. Gender not disclosed. A person who had once been on the rise before disappearing from the public eye entirely. This person, Monique explained, had been at a retreat hosted by a major male filmmaker. Phones confiscated, contracts signed, rituals performed, things so bizarre and unsettling that the person left the industry days later. She didn't name the filmmaker, but she didn't have to. The implications hovered like smoke. The judge reminded the court that these were still allegations. But the jury wasn't hearing just hearsay. They were hearing pattern. They were hearing ritualized silence, systemic control, and a culture where power wasn't just protected, it was weaponized. Monique sat straighter. This isn't about one man anymore. It's about all the people who held the door open for him, then bolted it shut behind them. The judge nodded to the prosecution. They moved to admit the redacted statement into evidence. The defense fumbled, objected, failed. It was in. Then came the question that had to be asked. Ms. Jackson, the prosecutor said gently, Do you believe Sean Combs played a role in your career's decline? She didn't blink. Not at first, she said, but eventually, yes. When they realized I wouldn't go quietly, I became a liability. And Puff doesn't like liabilities. The courtroom collectively leaned in. Monique described a call from a junior executive at Revolt TV years after the fallout. He told her, verbatim, "You rubbed the wrong people. It's not just about Tyler and Oprah. Puff don't like noise either." She paused. That's when I knew. I wasn't just collateral. I was currency. They traded my silence to each other to protect something bigger. Emails appeared on screen, next presented by the prosecution. Conversations between PR firms hired by both Diddy's Revolt and Tyler Perry Studios. They didn't just mention Monique. They mentioned Cassie, side by side. Narratives crafted, perceptions shaped, labels deployed like tactical weapons unstable, emotional, not a team player. The courtroom didn't gasp. They sat in the kind of stillness that only truth can command. Monique exhaled slowly, then dropped the line that would echo across every network by nightfall. I wasn't blackballed, she said. I was whiteballed by black people. The room shattered. No noise. Just the thunder of reality hitting marble floors. By now, no one questioned whether Monique belonged in that courtroom. She wasn't a witness anymore. She was the reckoning. The jury, once passive observers, now took notes as if their pens were running on gasoline. Reporters didn't type, they transcribed. Even the judge, typically a bastion of procedural detachment, wore an expression that said, "This isn't ordinary testimony. This is testimony that rewrites the record." Monique looked exhausted, but her voice didn't waver. "You know what they said to me?" she asked, eyes cast toward the jury, but speaking to everyone. They said, I should be grateful. Grateful to be invited. Grateful to work for free. Grateful to be in the room. Even when that room tried to swallow me whole. She turned toward Diddy. I saw things at that party I wasn't supposed to. But what I didn't realize, until much later, was how many people saw them too. The prosecution asked her to clarify, and what came next didn't just deepen the case, it tore the ceiling off the courtroom. Monique said she'd been contacted by 3 separate people in the years after the party, all of them insiders. All of them whispering warnings under the guise of friendship. They'd seen similar parties, heard the same phrases. You're safe? Just sign? This is how it works. She named no names this time, but she didn't have to. The pattern was clear. The machine was not built by one man. It was maintained by a choir of silence people who didn't commit the acts, but sanitized them. She called it the industry custodial force. Then she shifted gears. I didn't want to testify, she said. When the prosecution reached out 2 months ago, I said no. I told them I wasn't going to relive it, wasn't going to reopen the trauma, wasn't going to subject my family, my sons, my peace, to that again. She took a breath, but then I saw the Prince recording. I saw Cassie break down on that stand, and I heard Diddy screaming in this very courtroom. Another beat, and then I heard my grandmother's voice in my head, saying, "Baby, don't let them write your story without you in the room." It wasn't a performance. It was a declaration. And in that moment, even those who doubted her couldn't look away. This was no longer about scandal. It was about culture, history, the price of survival in an empire built on silence. The prosecution then asked her the final question of the day. In your opinion, Ms. Jackson, what was the root cause of this entire system of silence? Monique didn't miss a beat. Fear, she said. Everybody's afraid in this industry. Afraid to lose a job, afraid to lose a deal, afraid to lose their relevance, and most of all, afraid to tell the truth. Because people like Puff, like Tyler, and yes, like Oprah, have made it very expensive to do so. Her voice softened. But I stopped being afraid the day I realized I had nothing left they could take from me. Then she looked directly at Diddy, her tone almost gentle, but each word slicing deeper than the last. You thought no one would talk. You thought you built something strong enough to silence everybody. But now, you're sitting in silence. And I hope, finally, you hear us. The courtroom sat paralyzed. No one breathed. The judge nodded. Court was adjourned for the day. And Monique. She stepped down from the stand with the posture of someone who had not just survived, but conquered. She didn't just break her silence. She broke the spell. When Monique exited the courtroom, she didn't walk like someone who had just unloaded decades of trauma. She walked like someone who'd just unmasked a system. Outside. There were no flashing cameras. They weren't allowed near the trial. But the silence that followed her down the hallway was its own kind of spotlight. Prosecutors avoided eye contact, as if still processing what had just happened. Even defense attorneys, usually cocky with pretrial swagger, looked as if their briefcases had gotten heavier. Inside, the air hadn't cleared. It had curdled. Because now everyone had to grapple with a truth too large to refute, and too dangerous to ignore. Court resumed the next morning with one objective: damage control. Diddy's legal team opened with a motion to strike Monique's testimony from the record. Their argument. Her claims were speculative, emotionally charged, and beyond the scope of the trial. But the judge had already made up his mind. Her credibility is intact. Her evidence is documented. Motion denied. The gallery reacted not with noise, but with breath. You could hear it one collective inhale as the defense realized the tide had turned. Meanwhile, the prosecution didn't waste a second. They began tracing Monique's timeline against previously admitted testimonies and exhibits. Emails from PR firms, Cassie's prior statements, even earlier interviews with former bodyguards and assistants. And for the first time, a pattern emerged so clearly, even the jury began connecting dots without instruction. It wasn't just Diddy, it was the scaffolding. Then the prosecution dropped what they'd been saving. A series of internal emails from Revolt TV, dated back to 2017. In them, executives openly discussed narrative control around certain talent. One email, in particular, stood out: if she doesn't play ball, kill the press. We'll spin her like we did with Monique. The courtroom didn't gasp this time. They just turned toward Diddy, who, for the first time since the trial began, no longer looked like a man in control of his image. His jaw clenched, his fingers curled. He looked not at his lawyer, not at the judge, but at the floor. Like maybe he finally saw what he was standing on, a trapdoor. And it wasn't just Monique's words anymore. It was evidence, documentation, receipts that didn't scream or beg, they just confirmed. The prosecution leaned in. This was never just about what happened at a party. This was about who was allowed to say what happened, and who made sure the world never heard it. Then, they introduced a new piece of evidence, a recorded phone call redacted for identity, in which a known producer admitted being warned not to touch Monique. Not because of talent, but because she was bad optics. The phrase was repeated: bad optics. 3 times. The jury visibly flinched. The day ended with a return to the transcript. The one Monique had brought in. The apology from Tyler Perry. In it, he admitted she wasn't difficult. Just principled, that she refused to work without compensation and never bowed to pressure. I should have said it publicly, he had told her. But I can't go public. Puff's name is too deep in this. It was no longer just gossip. It was federal evidence. And the courtroom knew something massive had just shifted. When court adjourned, Diddy didn't leave through the main exit. He took the back hallway. For the first time, the gallery didn't track his departure. They watched the prosecution and the prosecution. They looked like they had everything they needed, The final day of the trial didn't begin with a bang. It began with a whisper. A new energy had settled over the courtroom. Not electric, not frantic, just heavy. Like everyone inside knew they weren't just watching a man be tried. They were witnessing an entire industry forced into the light. Gone were the theatrics. The lawyers no longer barked. Reporters no longer speculated. Even Diddy no longer postured. Because now, it wasn't about what he did. It was about how many let him do it and how far they went to protect him. The prosecution stood first, but they didn't start with evidence. They started with a question. To this jury, the lead prosecutor said, what does power mean in a place where silence is currency, where image outweighs justice, where the truth only matters if someone famous is brave enough to say it under oath? Then they pivoted to Monique and her story. They recapped her testimony, but not as a character witness. As a cultural witness, they compared timelines, cross-referenced statements, showed how every email, every PR directive, every whispered warning she received matched patterns now proven by other witnesses. But the most devastating moment came when they read from the transcript one last time. Tyler Perry's voice, calm, regretful, but damning. I know I messed up. You weren't difficult. You just wouldn't work for free. I should have said that publicly, but I can't. Puff's name is wrapped up in too much. The prosecutor paused, then spoke directly to the jury. That line right there is the system. It's not just Puff. It's the shadow he cast, and the ones who stood in it. They ended by invoking the same phrase Monique had used. She wasn't blackballed. She was whiteballed by black people, by people who looked like her, who feared losing their own seat at the table more than they feared doing wrong. There was no objection. There was no noise, just wait and silence. The real kind. When it was the defense's turn, they tried. They tried to claim conspiracy, bitterness, hearsay. They tried to paint Monique as vengeful, unreliable, unhinged. But the problem was, the jury had already heard her, seen her, believed her. And every accusation they threw bounced off evidence now embedded in the court record. Monique didn't need to take the stand again, because she'd never left. The verdict came fast. Not the trials that was still to be deliberated, but the cultural one, immediate. Media erupted, not just with headlines, but reckonings. Producers issued statements. Silent execs quietly resigned. PR firms erased names from client lists. And social media. It didn't just trend. It trembled. Because one woman, written off for a decade, had walked into a courtroom and told the truth louder than $1 billion machine could suppress it. And what about Diddy? He didn't cry, didn't flinch. He just sat there, alone, small, drenched in silence, the kind you can't spin, the kind that isn't content, the kind that sounds a lot like justice. As for Monique, she left through the front door. No bodyguards, no handlers, just grace. And when asked by a reporter what she wanted people to remember most from her testimony, she smiled. I want them to remember that silence is expensive. And I finally stopped paying.